I feel like it's like fashionable for people to shit on Kirk Hammett as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a thing or not, but is that justified? Is he overrated, underrated? Like, kind of curious where you come in on that.
I think Kirk Hammett is perfectly rated. Let's put it that way.
Hello and welcome to another week of 1001 Album Complaints, the show where musicians, lifelong musicians, old friends get together and analyze, talk about, discuss, and talk shit on an album from Robert Dimery's seminal work, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. We're going to do a deep dive on the album, its impact on the world of music, where it fits in the artist's career, and where it fits in our lives, and talk about some of the songs as well. And at the end, we're going to vote. Did you really need to listen to this album before you died? You'll have our official opinion by the end of this podcast. This week, we've been listening to Metallica's eponymous Black Album. That's an eponymous album, but it's also known as the Black Album. So very excited to get into this with you gentlemen on the call here today. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Good day.
Hey, good to hear from you.
Expecting some response from us on that one, Rob.
Listen, you run a tight ship. We don't speak until spoken to. All
Yeah.
right.
Oh, sorry. I have to say your name directly. Okay, before we get into introductions and encapsulated reviews of Metallica's Black Album, which I'm very excited to hear how everyone's week was, I wanted to read some listener mail because we got some good stuff this week. So this is in reference to our recent episode about Bob Marley and the Wailers' Natty Dread. Listener Dominic writes in, and by the way, it's a complaint. I think this might be our first official complaint.
Of course, this is the one I hosted too.
So get ready for some shade, Alan. So listener Dominic writes in, during your most recent episode, a lot of you landed on Natty Dread as the best that reggae has to offer, and I wanted to put in my own 2 cents in opposition. I discovered reggae by way of dub reggae a long time ago. I first heard that compilation Dub Gone Crazy by King Tubby. Sorry, I'm having a hard time not laughing. I think reggae band names and artist names are pretty hilarious. But anyway, listener Dominic says, it was a revelation. I'd never heard anything so trippy, chill, experimental, melodic. Then I started exploring all these other less dubby reggae albums. And he goes on to give us a series of recommendations if we want to expand our palette of minor key reggae, as we said. So he recommends things like Junior Mervin, The Congos, Max Romeo, and Culture.
This is why we do this. This is why we do it.
This is why we do this.
Tell us how dumb we are. You know, that's really
this is why we do this.
So people don't tell us that enough in our day-to-day lives.
So beaten down. We clearly don't know that much about reggae. I think we're pretty upfront about that. We took the Bob Marley and the Wailers record sort of at face value and talked about our own experiences with it and where it kind of fit in the pantheon of reggae. But this is a good example of how we can maybe explore a little more between King Tubby and Lee Scratch Perry and all those other band names that listener Dominic recommended. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the Harder They Fall
the Jimmy
soundtrack
Cliff
album. The Jimmy Cliff, mostly Jimmy Cliff songs on that soundtrack album, but also includes reggae luminaries such as Desmond Decker and Toots and the Maytals, and that is a little more what you'd call major key reggae, but also a great compilation as a soundtrack to a movie I believe that came out in the late 60s, early 70s. Anyway, that's a fun one as well. So if you're looking to expand your reggae palette, those are some great options for you listeners. Dive in.
So should we be prepared for the metalheads to come after us after this episode?
Well, it's funny you mention that because this happens to be a very contentious album in the metal pantheon. I think all would agree, but also an extremely successful one. You know, generally albums are contentious when they are extremely successful. So let's get right into talking about Metallica's Black Album. I'd love to introduce our cast of characters, and we actually have a very special guest today I'm going to give a special introduction to momentarily, and I'd love to hear everyone's encapsulated sort of tweet-length review of Metallica's Black Album. So I'm going to start with our guest first. His name is Nick Morrison. He's the Amazon #1 best-selling author. He's a professional musician. He's a composer. He's a teacher. He's a YouTube creator. He's coming to us from Calgary, Canada. Nick has toured through the United States and Japan and Canada as a guitar player. Basically, his bona fides are way beyond all of ours, so we're very excited to have him here. Did I mention that he was educated at Berklee College of Music. Very exciting. So I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for him and want to dive in, but I'm going to throw it over to Mr. Nick Morrison right now.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful welcome. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited to be here. All right. My tweet length encapsulated review, Metallica's Metallica. That's the first thing I should mention. It's not actually called the Black Album. That's just a nickname. But here we go. Metallica. The best album of all time, period. #fight me.
Ooh, all right.
Oh, shit.
I like this. Yes.
Coming in hot.
Got to take a strong stance, right?
Coming in hot. Okay, well, it's going to be interesting to see how this one goes. All right, so I'm going to kick it over to Tom next.
Oh, goddamn. You're going to make me follow that up? All right, fine. My encapsulated review here, this is Tom. Metallica set out to make a metal album for non-metalheads. They definitely succeeded, much to the chagrin of, I think, a lot of their historic fans. In the process, they got maligned by a lot of metalheads, but did they actually create more metalheads with this album than kind of all of the other metal albums previous combined? I think this might have spawned more metal fans than any other metal album of all time.
Interesting. That's kind of like how "This is your brain on drugs" ad actually probably created more drug addicts.
Yeah, I looked at it. I was like, that seems pretty fucking rad. Let's do that.
Dude, I remember I said all the time that when I took Dare, which Nick, I don't know if you had Dare in Canada, but it was like
We
a drug.
did, actually.
I remember being way more interested in drugs when they came in and told us that, like, this is LSD and this makes you feel like you want to fly. And I remember being like, well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So it may have had the unintended effect there.
Challenge accepted.
This stuff feels so good. People ruin their lives for it. I'm like, well, that's got to feel pretty damn good then. Let's check that out.
Okay, we're gonna keep it going here and pass it over to Alan.
Yeah, this is Alan here. Worst metal album of all time, fight me. No, I'm totally kidding. So this album to me, in retrospect and re-listening to it again this week, was a little less interesting than I remembered it being. But are there some absolute bangers on this album? To that, I would say, yeah.
Love it.
Nice vocalization. Nice grunts. All right, Phil, let's kick it to you.
I'm gonna say that, this was an interesting one this week because I mean to champion Alan, there are some absolute just crushers on this record, no doubt. But in a completely different way, it's like Metallica cleaned up for this record. So yeah, Metallica cleans up and goes mainstream would probably be my tweet length review.
Phil, my alternate tweet length review was metal you can listen to with your mom for this album, which I figured, I'm not necessarily even saying that's an insult, but that was kind of my snarky take on it. But yeah, I don't know. I like to listen to music with my mom. She's got some interesting opinions. She grew up in the 60s, you know?
Yeah. She did a lot of that LSD, probably.
That'll explain all that.
So this is Rob. Just to round it out, this is Rob here, and my tweet length review of Metallica's Metallica is, I can confidently say that this is the best ever heavy metal record. That includes a West Side Story tease.
Oh.
There's a West Side Story tease.
Really, yeah. A lot of contenders for that one, right, Rob?
Little bit of a deep cut on that one. Okay. Yeah. Yes, they do reference West Side Story. I just thought that was a really odd choice for Metallica, but it was in there. It was in there.
I must have missed that.
So,
interestingly, sorry if I can take us off track for half a second. I actually did a review of the Metallica Black Album probably about a year ago on my YouTube channel, and I talked about that specific quote from West Side Story. I'm very careful with YouTube because they're really tight ass. Sorry, I should probably ask, are we allowed to swear on the podcast?
Okay,
so YouTube is super tight-assed when it comes to copyright infringement, and even if you're doing it in an academic way or in a reference way or a parody way, you'll get dinged and you'll get a copyright strike, and if you get too many of them, you lose your monetization, you lose your channel, etc., etc. So I'm very careful with the length of music that I use, how much I quote, what I do with it. That video ended up getting pinged, but not for anything of Metallica's. It got pinged for West Side Story.
Wow.
It's just to be clear, it's the guitar riff at the beginning of Don't Tread on Me, I believe.
Yeah.
The I Want to Be in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think once you say it, then you listen to it, you'll know what we're talking about. I know we're not all denizens of the musical theater exactly on this call here, but it should be familiar. So before we go any deeper into Metallica's Black Album, let's play a little snippet just to give you a taste of what you're going to hear contained on this album. Here is a little piece of the huge mega hit, Enter Sandman. Can't imagine you've never heard this song. It was ubiquitous probably continues to be ubiquitous. So I have a hard time believing that anyone that clicked on this podcast is unfamiliar with Enter Sandman, but I'm glad we got that piece out of the way. It was a huge hit for them. So let's talk about where Metallica was kind of at. Yes, Alan.
Sorry, I couldn't help. I just watched a video the other day. Do you know that guy Larnell Lewis, the drummer for Snarky Puppy?
Yeah.
I think it was him where they do one of those reaction videos where he listens to Enter Sandman for the first time. Or he may have done another song. I may be conflating certain folks, but like I couldn't get over the fact that a professional musician hadn't heard the song, even if they're in a totally different
he
sort
claimed
of jazz
no,
genre.
I have not heard this song.
So, maybe he's like, a lot of these guys are like church players, and so maybe that's where they spend most of their time.
Could be.
That I found that to be like utterly shocking.
It was shocking when I saw that video. Same thing.
Okay, got it.
I've seen, and that's a whole series of videos, right? I saw one where the guy was playing, what's the famous Tool song?
Schism.
It's 7 or Schism. That's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't remember what the drummer's name was, but some jazz drummer. I mean, they must recruit those guys and then go through a list of popular material and go, which of these haven't you heard? It's got to be a little hard to find that, right?
In all honesty, is Larnell Lewis is either 12 or has never walked by a radio in his life. Because if you've walked by a radio just playing some top 40 or I guess at this point classic.
Yeah, I also feel like you couldn't have watched a football game or a baseball game or like
a hockey game.
Yeah, or Nightmare on Elm
Thanks,
Street
Canada,
movie.
with the hockey game.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Also, if I'm looking at a list, it'd be much easier to say I've never heard this song. But once you play the song, you go, I've heard that at the stadium, obviously.
Absolutely, yes.
But at that point, you're pot committed based on the nature of the video, right? So you just have to roll with it.
Also, it's YouTube. Like, to be fair. Like,
YouTube
let's make
isn't real?
clickbait.
Well, you're saying they might not be telling the truth? Is that
They might not be. They might not
Liars
be.
on the internet.
Although it's possible. There is, and I know we're going off topic a little bit, but there's a band from I want to say New Jersey, but they're singers from Denmark. They were really popular in the 80s. They were called White Lion. And I'd never heard of them. We didn't get them in Canada, or at least in the tiny little town that I actually grew up in. And I'd never heard of them literally until about 6 months ago. And I'm a huge metalhead, a huge 80s fan, like all that kind of stuff. And I was just blown away. I was like, how did I never hear about these guys? But we have this thing called CanCon where like 30% of our radio has to be Canadian artists. So there's a bunch of stuff that if it's like kind of like B-level or C-level hits, they just don't get played here in favor of Canadian music.
Does that explain the Bare Naked Ladies? Is that how we got them voiced? I was
going to say
probably.
That's before you play 30% of only the Tragically Hip, right?
Yeah, shoot me, please.
Okay. Cool. Let's get a little bit into the background of how this record was made. It's Metallica's 5th album. They were thinking they wanted something new, right? They felt that at this point in their career, they had built a really nice following. They had toured the world. They were successful by a lot of measures that we can point to, but they hadn't really broken through to the mainstream. They literally said, "Hey, we want our Back in Black," referencing the AC/DC record. We want something big, and how are we going to do it? And they, in some senses, they felt like they had kind of proved their sort of prog metal chops over the years. A lot of their earlier records had these very long, very complicated songs. I think a lot of the songwriting at that time was informed by, how can it be more complex? How many times can we change time signatures? How fast can we go? Things like that. And one of the fun anecdotes I heard was that Kirk Hammett claims that when they were on the tour for the last record, which was called And Justice for All, and they were playing the title track, And Justice for All, one night, which is like a 10-minute, super long song, very involved song, he looks out in the crowd and he sees people like yawning and checking their watch. And he's like, oh, I think something's gone awry here, right? So they started to have this thought of like, I think this kind of songwriting has run its course. How do we move to the next stage of the band? And they started looking around at the producers of the day, and they end up hooking up with this guy, Bob Rock.
That's the first miracle, right? The first miracle of this record.
The first miracle, absolutely. Fellow Canadian, I might add.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say it's a miracle that his actual God-given name is Robert Jens Rock.
Yes.
Bob Rock.
That's miracle one. I think.
It reminds me of that Saved by the Bell episode where they're playing in the garage and they're like, and all of a sudden Fate walked by and the guy's like, "Hi, my name's Nick Fate," or whatever.
So this guy, Bob Rock, Canadian producer, guy who had kind of been around the business and produced some really great records. Specifically, the record that Metallica loved was one Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. And they heard the sound on that. They heard Tommy Lee's drums on that. Lars was like, "Oh, we gotta talk to the guy that made this." And it turns out it was Bob Rock. But he had also worked on, he was like the mixer and the engineer on Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. I think he had worked with maybe Def Leppard or other 80s luminaries. He had been a musician himself, and then transitioned into being an engineer, a mixer, and ultimately a producer. And when they originally reached out to him, they wanted him just to mix the record, and he refused. This is how you know he thinks of himself in a very confident way. He was like, "No, I'll only do it if I can produce the record." Metallica, on the other hand, were very used to producing records on their own. Lars and James Hetfield, the drummer and the rhythm guitar player and singer, respectively, were used to handling all that on their side. And what it resulted in, another thing that Bob Rock kind of did right away, was if you go back and listen to some of those old Metallica records, they have very little bass in the mix. Not just the bass guitar, but even the bass drum. So I think a lot of what Bob Rock did was come in and say, we need to give you guys some low end. We need to slow the songs down. We need to condense the songs a bit to make them a little more radio friendly as singles. And I want to add a lot more low end to this mix and to your sound generally.
Well, I think one of the things I saw was that they asked him to don't play it like a guitar, because I think maybe that's how he was used to like fleshing out the riffs or something. But yeah, I think that focusing on the bass aspect comes through for sure.
It's funny because in preparation for this, of course, I pulled out all of my Metallica archive. I've got a huge collection of stuff, and I will fully admit to being a Metallica fanboy. So I've got the Black Album reissue box set, and I was reading through the liner notes and whatnot. And Jason talks about this specifically, where he and Bob and Randy Staub, who was the mixing engineer on the record, really sat down and discussed, and they really kind of taught him how to be more of a rock bass player versus a metal bass player. But part of that, I think, with And Justice for All, you have to go back even further to look at Master of Puppets, because Master of Puppets, which would be most Metallica fans pick as their best album, I think, was really orchestrated, arranged, and written in huge part by Cliff Burton, who was their original bass player, who died on the tour for that record. And part of that grieving process, for whatever it's worth, and James has even sort of admitted this, and you can see a lot of it on Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica, which was the documentary that they made to document the making of the Black Album. But they were really hazing Jason, and part of that process was, we're going to mix you out of the record because fuck you, you're not Cliff Burton.
That's really interesting, because I went back and sort of skimmed the records. Master of Puppets is definitely the one I'm most familiar with. And that's sort of the thing I learned this week is like, I actually don't know Metallica's records that well. I know Master of Puppets. I know the songs that dudes played for me in grade school and high school, right, that are on And Justice for All and Ride the Lightning. And I know the hits from the Metallica record, like from Metallica and from Load, and some of the later stuff. But I don't really know Metallica that well. I just know like a little more than the sort of superficial hits. But when you go back, Ride the Lightning, the first one, it has bass, right?
Yeah.
And I would guess that that's a function of them being more junior dudes in the studio and just trusting somebody else, maybe because they have to, or maybe trusting Cliff Burton. I don't know. But like, there is low end on Ride the Lightning. There isn't on Master of Puppets. Well, there isn't, but like, there's less. It's more of it's focused in a different way. And then, yeah, there's just no bass on Injustice for All.
Yeah.
I think a big part of it was that when you think about a band dynamics, Cliff Burton was a full-fledged member of the band and also a goddamn shredder. He was a really good bass player. So he played up on the neck a lot as well. Like, he really would get into it. He was not necessarily laying back a lot. He would at times, but he had a lot of passages that he would be playing up on the neck. And this is a band that I think I'm not telling tales out of school here to say that it's full of egos. And when you get a guy like Jason Newsted, who's new to the band and is not able to carry his own weight in that situation, Lars is like, I'm going to mix my drums way higher than the bass. And then Kirk's like, well, I'm going to put my guitar way higher than the bass. And I'm going to put the vocals way higher than the bass. And everything ends up being way higher. And he's probably sitting in the corner like, I don't know, guys, I'm just pretty happy to be along for the ride. Like,
Right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think all of that. I think all of that are factors, right? And in general, I always think that mixes on records and what gets the most prominence are some kind of reflection of the power dynamics in any given band. And I think, it's also a lot of the previous recordings were driven. A lot of the writing was driven by Lars and James. And just to jump right into even the way they used to record records, I was surprised to learn that this was the first time they were trying to do takes as a band together in the room, or at least some of the early times. Meaning to say that a lot of the other records were constructed from solo drum tracks and then on up, as opposed to kind of getting a live band feel in the room. Now, that said, even some of the drum tracks on this are in fact spliced together from various Lars drum tracks, which again I found really interesting too, because you get a very live, contiguous feel you would never notice those kinds of splices. And this is the tape splicing era. In fact, I believe the engineer was called like Randy Razorblade.
Randy Staub, yeah.
Yeah, as a loving joke about how he had to cut the tape together to mix these takes.
So is it time to start talking shit on Lars's drumming? Are we at that point of the podcast yet? Because
yeah.
splicing together a lot of Lars drum takes, I'm not a Lars hater by any means, but listening to a lot of the drum takes, I'm not hearing
Lars
complex bass work, complex tom work. It's really a lot of 1, 2, 3.
It's caveman drumming.
Type of,
Lars's public persona does not make it easier to like Lars's music.
He seems like a huge asshole. Let's start with Lars. So first of all, he's Danish, and he comes from, I think both of his parents were like professional tennis players, so he's kind of always been
that's
a little
interesting.
bit of a rich kid, cool kid. And guess which former podcast subject he happened to be childhood friends with?
Nana Cherry. No.
Nana Cherry.
That's correct. So these are all problems.
I just picked the worst.
Yeah, his dad
he's
is
Danish.
Badass, though. We all saw his dad in the documentary. His dad's a badass.
Oh,
right.
That might be my favorite moment from any music documentary, where he plays, I think it's Saint Anger for his dad, and he says, "You should just take this album and throw it right in the trash." And the look in his face is just like, oh. But you have no sympathy for him because you just watched him sell his art collection for like $25 million and be all like, "Woo! I'm even more rich now. Fuck you all." Like, go to hell, Lars.
That said, to play and then let's not forget Lars is coming out against Napster and that whole debacle. Like, he doesn't have a great public persona. He kind of seems like an asshole in all the film.
Although in retrospect, he was not wrong.
He wasn't wrong, maybe, but he was fighting.
You're not wrong, dude. You're
battle.
just an asshole.
Exactly.
Am I wrong?
Thank you. Excellent. Very nice. Very nice quote.
Here's another leading indicator that Lars might not be such a great guy. He's currently on his 4th marriage.
Yes.
And in fact, so here's a little context I always think is interesting. When these guys were recording this record, they were all right about the age of 27, which in my mind, this came out when I was about the age of 12, and I had the tape, which was, I didn't even have a lot of tapes. I was right before the CD era. So it was early in my music listening career. But you always just think of these people as immeasurably older than you, right? But the fact that they're only 27 years old, but even though they were only 27 years old, 3 of the 4 guys, everyone but Hetfield, was going through a divorce while they were doing this recording.
I remember seeing an interview with Hetfield where he was talking about, basically it was like, hey, like, what's your life now? And he was like, well, I play a show. We get done playing a show. We go out. There's a huge shower. We get in there, and a bunch of naked women come and scrub us down. It's a pretty good life. And, like, how are you going to stay married? How are you going to, like, you married somebody when you're 22 and got your first record contract? You're like, yeah, all right. Not that I wouldn't say that they were an asshole for having been divorced a bunch of times. I would say that they're an asshole for getting married times 2, 3, 4, and 5 when you're like, listen, we all know which way this is going. I'm just going to completely cheat on you.
You're like, look, honey, you know about the showers, right? Because that's just a part of the deal here.
And she's like, yeah, of course, you know that I'm going to take like 30% of your wealth as soon as this happens, right? So
30% if you're lucky, bro. Yeah. But just I like Lars's drumming. I do think my understanding, I'm not a Metallica historian, so maybe Nick can weigh in. But my understanding is that they were purposely trying to simplify the tunes a little bit, and that included the drumming on this record. But I think he shows some really good taste, and I think that the genre they're swimming in generally rides and dies on rhythmic changes, rhythmic shifts, when they switch to halftime or when they go to double time, when they drop out. There's a few very tasty little things that I think he does that are simple but impactful, that sell the songs above and beyond just a repeated riff.
I think sell the songs is a good way to say it. I think there's like a through line between Lars and Ringo, and I know that's like a really weird comparison, but like they just make the songs work, right? Like they sound really good. The actual sound quality of the drum is fabulous, right? Like, and it's sort of in there in a way where it's like almost lyrical. Very different here, right? Than, maybe like, When I'm 64 or something. But like, yeah, I think he serves these songs perfectly.
Yeah. And again, it was that conscious effort to have a more accessible sound and a more, quite rightly, Back in Black feel, because his drumming on this record was purposefully modeled after Phil Rudd from AC/DC. If you listen to his hits on the backbeats when he hits his splash cymbals, is exactly the same kind of 4 on the floor, straight ahead, 4/4 rhythms that AC/DC were doing, 10 years earlier with Back in Black, or I guess 11 years, because they would have made it in 1980, something like that, before it was released. But that was that was the purpose. It was like, well, it worked in this, let's pull it into our music and make it accessible. Because beyond that, to the Ringo thing, sorry, I didn't mean to step all over you. To the Ringo thing, whether it was conscious or not, this album, to somebody's point, I think birthed more metalheads than any other metal album, and probably caused more young drummers to start drumming, more young guitar players to start guitaring, myself included, and more singers to want to start writing songs, or bass players even to play bass. And I think that was part of it because of that accessibility.
I'm not trying to talk shit on Lars. I feel like he gets a lot of shit talked on him, and I think that part of the reason why he gets a lot of shit talked on him is because, by and large, a metal band, very much like a punk band, if the drummer is not the best member of the band, you suffer from that. And I would not look at Lars and say that he's the best member of Metallica. We brought up Tool before, and what's the drummer from Tool? Danny Carey, right? Mm-hmm. He's the best member of Tool by far, and that's the reason that Tool is amazing. Danny Carey and Maynard, right? Like, you get Maynard and you get Danny Carey together, those two guys make the band, and everything else you could kind of swap out a bunch of those pieces. I don't necessarily feel that way about Lars. I don't think that he carries the band in the way that a lot of metal drummers.
You think anyone in Metallica, except Hetfield, obviously, is replaceable? I'm
not even saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that usually in a metal band that is really good, you have like a virtuosic guitar player and a very good drummer, and that's what puts it all, ties it all.
I don't think it takes away from it though. I hear what you're saying, where like, so I remember growing up listening to this album specifically and some of the earlier stuff, but thinking in my head like, oh, Lars must be like the sickest drummer in the world, because like, listen to this, it's like fast, it's intense. Later on, I come to realize like maybe he's not that virtuoso, but I don't think, to someone's point earlier, it served the song. And I never listened to it and thought like, well, if the drummer was better, the output would be different. It's just never something I picked up on personally.
I will throw this out there. If the drummer was more of a shredder drummer, this would have been a worse album.
Yeah,
I would
100%.
agree with that. Yeah.
Let's talk. This is a good segue into what the context for this release is, right? And I want to get it more into Lars in specific in each individual song. But I do think contextually, this was at a transitional time in music. This was released on August 12th, 1991.
Yep.
For context, Nevermind came out a month later. It was recorded for about the year before that. But if you think about it, like I'm mentioning Nevermind because I think that heavy, loud music was sort of about to come back into vogue in a different way. And I think you can argue that this helped push grunge across the line to a certain extent. I even heard that these guys were listening to those early Soundgarden recordings and really liking them and like reading off of them. This is maybe pre Bad Motorfinger even.
It doesn't surprise, like, those are obviously different things, but I think Metallica sort of traversed that chasm, right, pretty well. And there really weren't a lot of bands that did. You sort of went down with the ship right at that sea change. Very few bands were big enough to sort of...
Right. And it's not long before Rage Against the Machine is coming out with that debut album, which we all agree is terrific and rocks really hard. So for me personally, I could say this definitely set a template for what it meant to rock. I agree it's more on the popular side, but that was purposeful, and I think it kind of helped usher in this new era of music. In terms of sales, we're talking 31 million sales. We're in Abbey Road and Born in the USA territory, but still safely below Shania Twain's Come On Over, luckily. So all is still right.
Where is it in relation to the Bodyguard soundtrack? That's the question everyone wants to know.
Way below, by the way. Way below the Bodyguard soundtrack. Not to go off track, but that Shania Twain album is actually pretty fucking good. That's a pretty good album. I'm not
Second Still the One on it?
I believe it's still the one. Man, I Feel Like a Woman is also on that list. I'm not a...
Don't impress me much.
Oh, God. Right? The hits just keep on coming.
As Lars sheds a singles
Shania
here.
Twain back in the day. Shania Twain was goddamn smoke show. Probably still is. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure she looks great. I saw John Scofield show maybe like 3 years ago, and he encored with the Shania Twain song. And it was great.
We just mentioned 3. Man, I Feel Like a Woman, Still the One.
Still the One.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's better than the Orleans version of that one, though.
So Lars said the idea was to cram Metallica down everybody's fucking throat all over the world.
Yeah.
And they succeeded handily. Everyone heard this record. It worked. In recording terms, was actually quite grueling. They fought a lot with this guy Bob Rock over control, over how the parts should go, over how long they should work on them, over how many takes they should do, over whether James Hetfield should try harder to sing, things like that, right? And they spent about 9 months and over $1 million recording this record, which I was a little surprised to hear, but it kind of makes sense for such a huge success. I want to talk about some of the hallmarks of the recording itself, and then I want to segue into the songs. So I think one that jumps out right away, and I still think this feels, to a certain extent, fresh and relevant. Like, I still really like it. The rhythm guitar sound.
Yes.
This close mic'd, no room sound at all rhythm guitar, which they put the amps in this tent where it was all covered in soundproofing curtains and baffles. And it just sounds so... It sounds like an engine starting up. It just sounds so intense. The crunch of those rhythm guitars.
Super tight, dry chug.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Like a diesel engine.
As we mentioned, it was one of the first times, at least, that they'd ever really tried recording as a band. So they were actually in the room doing takes together and kind of aiming more for feel than they ever had before. In the past, it was always about just executing really complex parts accurately. And this became a little more about feel, about groove. And part of that was about slowing things down, which as we all know, and frankly, Metallica should have already known as well earlier in their career, is a way to make things heavier. It actually rocks harder when it's slower in a lot of senses. That's what Black Sabbath taught us.
Yeah, I remember seeing something where I guess Bob Rock was working with Motley Crue, and when they did Sad But True, I guess we can save that for that song, but apparently they sort of discovered Drop D, or at least really got pretty hyped on it, and that helped them get even sludgier and, just slower and just...
Yeah.
So I hear stuff like that too, and that stuff is really surprising to me, because you would think that Black Sabbath and other bands of the 70s had laid out a very clear template for how to sound doomy and low and sludgy. I suppose it just wasn't maybe it wasn't the records that Metallica was listening to through the 80s, but I was a little surprised by that.
Yeah,
right?
I would think that's part of it. I mean, they listened to a lot of different music. Like, of course, I think Tony Iommi was a huge influence on Hetfield in terms of songwriting and like riff writing, but as a band, they were much more into the Nawabum, which would be the new wave of British heavy metal. So you've got your Iron Maidens, you've got and of course I'm blanking on the names now, but a lot of the newer, younger, speedier style of metal coming out of England at the time. And again, going back to those early records, like you look at Kill 'Em All, you look at Ride the Lightning, even Master of Puppets, like this is thrash, this is speed metal. This is not your granddad's metal, or your father's metal, as they may have said it, at the time. And they were interested in speed and precision and that attack and that real sort of like punk ethos of, fuck you, we're going to play 1,000 power chords at once. Our song's going to be really short, although they went over the top and made them really long. But like, it was just a completely different stylistic thing. And then, the Black Album really, again, just shifted it down into a lower gear, got it low, got it chuggy. The Tent of Doom is what they called that big device that they put around the amps.
It's a good point to talk about the genre lineage, that thrash metal in the 80s was probably more descendant from punk and prog, and less from what I was thinking of as 70s metal via Black Sabbath.
Totally.
I remember very famously there was a photo shoot that Metallica did, and I believe it was after like Use Your Illusion became a huge hit, where basically it was Lars coming out as like a huge Guns N' Roses fan, and it was all of the other members of the band in black leather, and then Lars was dressed in like white leather, and that was sort of Lars being like, I actually really like Guns N' Roses and like that kind of music, and I'm not just like a metalhead. So that gets to your point about the fact that they do listen to a diverse set of music, and it wasn't just like, all right, it's just all speed and thrash, and that's it, no, nothing else exists. I'm sure they probably listened to like a Loretta Lynn album or two,
Yeah, no musicians actually feel that way. Like, the idea of genre siloing in that way is kind of ridiculous. And frankly, looking back now on something like Appetite for Destruction, you could reasonably call that heavy metal. Like, why wouldn't it be? It has huge, heavy, distorted electric guitars. I agree. It doesn't sound like Master of Puppets, but it's its own thing.
Like skis metal.
Skis metal, sure.
Yeah.
This is where subgenres and all that helpful fragmenting come into play. Okay, let's start talking about the tunes. Let's jump back into the mega hit and the song that opens the album once more. Enter Sandman. Here's a snippet of that again.
Sleep with one eye open, gripping your pillow tight. Exit light, enter night. Take my hand, off to Neverland.
Alan, what do you think about this tune?
I mean, I don't know what's to say about a song like this. Like, it's an epic song, and I think sometimes songs that become this popular, like Adam always talks about, if something has entered like Sweet Home Alabama territory, meaning that you've heard it so many times that you're not even sure what to make of it anymore. It's almost like not music, it's this other form of entertainment. This song has definitely entered that in terms of just the ubiquitousness, if that's the right word. I mean, but it's just a fucking awesome song.
It's great, though.
It's
It is an
ridiculous.
extremely well-crafted hit song.
It's well-crafted.
In my opinion.
It's, what is it, 5 to 6 minutes, but the pacing feels great. There's never a point where it doesn't feel like there's like wasted calories. it's sick. It's just a sick song.
It doesn't drop till 55 seconds. And like in my mind, it's sort of like forever tied to the video.
Yeah.
And although in my mind, I actually think I see the truck hit at the beginning, but that actually comes in the bridge.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
During
Yeah.
one of Hetfield's two great non-vocal
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the conversation he has with a child, which is a really interesting choice for the bridge of the, like the first track on your record and a single in general.
Yeah.
I think that, listen, kids are creepy as fuck, all right? This is coming from somebody who has kids. Kids are creepy as fuck, and when they talk to you in that little creepy-ass voice and say things that you don't expect to come out of their mouth, it creeps you out. Very good use of that device.
Oh, yeah. No, I think they leveraged it very well. I agree.
I'm not going to talk shit on Lars's drumming on this one. It is very simple, and again, it's very Back in Black. That's not a bad thing. I'm going to give him a lot of praise. Right at 4 minutes and 27 seconds, there is a fantastic kind of, he just leaves the drums out for maybe like 8 or 9 seconds and just kicks back in right with the headphone. Oh!
My hand, off to never land.
It rocks.
I agree.
Really, really hard.
Well, that's where the truck hits in the video, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's on like the 2. Yeah,
Yeah.
something. Yeah, it's pretty good.
They managed to pack a lot of really exciting moments into this
Into that
song. And like you said, I think it really justifies its runtime, which I can't say that for every single song on this record. A couple other little tidbits, right? So, one, I heard that the lyrics were originally written about crib death. And then they asked Hetfield to pull it back a little.
Yeah, rein that in there,
bud.
bud.
Out of it.
They're like, wait, you want to go
Rein that in a
mainstream?
little bit.
Yeah.
But then the other one, and this is maybe a credit to Lars, because he's credited with this. When Kirk Hammett came up with the riff, it was a little more old school Metallica, which is to say it kind of went all the way through the front and the tail of the riff immediately and just repeated in that way, if you can think about the riff as having a front and an end,
So like,
end section.
right.
And that
yeah.
totally good, plausible riff to build a song around,
Totally.
right? And I think I'm understanding the story correctly, that Lars was the one that said, hey, wait a minute, let's stay on that first part for a little while. Let's build some tension. And I think that's such a great example of patience and arrangement in songwriting, and probably why Lars
Smarts.
is really helpful as a producer, as the leader of the band.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question on that note. Since we're talking about Kirk Hammett, like, this is a question more for you, Nick. I feel like it's like fashionable for people to shit on Kirk Hammett as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a thing or not, but is that justified? Is he overrated, underrated? Like, kind of curious where you come in on that.
I think Kirk Hammett is perfectly rated. Let's put it that way. Okay, hear me out. Again, coming up, and I'll be transparent. I am a Metallica fanboy. The Black Album made me want to pick up guitar and learn to play. I didn't want to be Kirk Hammett. I wanted to be James Hetfield. But Kirk's playing on this album, and interestingly enough, he had never touched a wah pedal before the Black Album. So the Black Album was the birth of the wah pedal and Kirk Hammett, that love affair that comes together. So he stylistically, going again all the way back through their catalog, was not the virtuoso shredder that a lot of people kind of associated him with being, or people have come to associate. Like if you look at guys like in Trivium or Dream Theater or
Like Dave Mustaine.
even Steve Vai, Dave Mustaine. Well, Dave Mustaine's definitely not a shredder, but he can make some pretty cool, interesting noise. He's a great songwriter.
Interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. But Kirk brought the blues. Kirk was and is like a really good blues player. He just happened to take a lot of speed and be like, all right, cool, I'm gonna play the blues really, really fast. Right? Because he plays minor pentatonic over basically everything. And then, he got that marriage with the wah pedal and went, wow, now my guitar can sound, my minor pentatonics can sound even more interesting, right? And since then, it's been this kind of, I think it's turned into a trope or a bit of a meme where, oh, well, if you want to play a Metallica style solo, just play minor pentatonic and put on the wah a lot. So I think, like I said, I think he's perfectly in that space of like, you know what, he kind of invented this thing. He brought the blues back into metal, and he, is responsible for arguably the biggest hit on the album. And he's a cool player. He's a very humble dude. Of all of them, I think he's kind of the most well-adjusted human. I'm sure he's not without his own problems.
I buy that. Except for that mustache,
the porn stash, right?
But that's coming back into fashion too.
Yeah, Jesus.
Well, so you make a good point that most of the riffs on this record, and I think most of the riffs historically in Metallica's career, were written by James Hetfield. Yeah. But this riff was written by Kirk Hammett, and so it is an epic riff. Just to get nerdy for a second, I learned it and I noticed that it really centers on the tritone interval. So even the metalheads listen to jazz, guys. They get it.
Yeah.
You got to play the devil's interval. Exactly. If you're in a fucking metal band, you're not playing the devil's interval, what are you doing? Come on.
They talk about how Kirk Hammett said that when they played their first shows for the Black Album, like right before it came out, they played up in Petaluma near San Francisco, and they were kind of like warm-up shows for the tour. And they literally just came out and started the set with Enter Sandman. And he was like, the first 5 or 6 notes, the entire place just woke up like nothing else. They knew immediately. It was like, oh, we have something here. And he said by the end of it, the crowd's like singing along with the chorus by the end of the first time they heard the song. So
yeah, it is a great song. It's definitely reached into that Sweet Home Alabama, Stairway to Heaven, like epic. What else would be like maybe YYZ by Rush, or like something more radio friendly like Limelight or some such.
Very Canadian comment there.
Well, but again, you're talking to a musician, like, and Rush is a bunch of music nerds, right?
So come on.
Oh, sorry. Did I say YYZ?
You said YYZ.
I should be saying YYZ.
Yeah.
Hey, I went to school in the States. All right. I came back home after being down there. My family's like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, "What do you mean, what's wrong with me?" That's weird. Anyway, we can cut that.
They barely
out.
listen to Rush down there. Okay, let's move it right along to the second tune on the records. This one's called "Sad but True."
My note on this tune is this song fucking rocks, and I don't care what anyone says. There is nothing you can do to convince me.
This is my favorite song on the record.
This is not my favorite song. But this song, my note, and I've maintained this, I think, since high school, is that if I was ever a professional wrestler, this is 100% my walkout music.
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah.
It's pretty badass.
It's really fucking badass.
Yeah.
And to me, when I was, because like I said, this is one of the first albums I really got into. I was at that age, that tender age, where I was just watching MTV and basically buying everything they told me to buy.
Yeah.
So literally the first tape I ever bought was Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood, and shortly after I bought this based on the videos. And I remember it being kind of my introduction to thematic lyric writing, because there's a clear framework for how he's writing the lyrics.
Oh yeah,
it comes to a clear conclusion at the end. It's a little hackneyed perhaps, but I'm you. And I got it. I was like, oh yeah, maybe I could write songs. I see this.
Totally.
Got it.
Totally.
He tossed in that vocab word, "do my dirty work, scapegoat," which still makes me smile.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a heavy tune, and it's the one that they pointed to a lot in a lot of because within a week or 2 weeks of the Black Album being released, they had their detractors, their hardcore fans going, this isn't a metal rock record, this isn't Metallica, this is shit, like people burning records, that whole kind of kickback, which at the end of the day, there is no such thing as bad press, right? But Hammett has said, like, you're going to tell me that Sad But True isn't a heavy metal song? Come on. And it is.
Yeah, it's a little silly, yeah.
Yeah, like to this day, you play that. And again, hockey arenas, football stadiums. I think I even heard it at a baseball game once when I went to like a Detroit Tigers game. Like it's heavy. And then of course you got Kid Rock coming along and doing a cover of it, slash mashup.
You mean wholesale theft? Is that what you mean? Wholesale theft?
Yeah, totally. I mean, they're credited as songwriters on that album or on that song, but
how could they not be, right?
Yeah.
Anybody seen the Jason Isbell cover of this?
No.
It's pretty great. It's more of like a straight blues. It doesn't really hit the changes. It's really cool.
I'll have to check that
I'll
out.
share it here. Yeah.
We'll put that in the list.
So,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, but the thing about fan reactions, I mean, let's keep threading these through as we talk about the songs, because fans just always have this reaction when a sort of cult band or a niche band becomes popular. Isn't that kind of true?
100%.
Would it really have mattered what was on the record? They got popular. That's the problem.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman, if any of you follow like nerd culture, comic books, the graphic novels, that kind of thing, he wrote the Sandman series, which was kind of tied into the topic that we're talking about, believe it or not. But he has a quote, and he talks about this, where as an author, a creative, obviously we're talking about musicians, but you get into this weird spot with your fans where if you reach a certain level of fame, or even if you're just at that very, very deep niche kind of secret hidden level where your fans love you for a certain reason, and basically what they tell you is, ooh, we love that, we'll have more of exactly the same, please. And that's what people want. So to your point, like it wouldn't have mattered what this album was unless it was another carbon copy of something that they'd already done before, which, to be fair, AC/DC and the Rolling Stones have done for, 75 years or something, and they're still going strong.
To great success.
Yeah.
I'm arguing something slightly different. I'm arguing, I agree with that sentiment, but I'm also arguing that when you, as a fan, you feel more connected to something when you feel like it's just yours.
Oh,
Just yours
100%.
and your
Exactly.
friends.
Even a carbon copy of their past albums getting super famous would have pissed
Would have
off the
soured
people who were like, now I can't, they're like the fucking normies like it. Now I can't define myself by this because this is a thing.
Like the
that
secret's
is
out,
just for me.
and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I still remember, I think it's my freshman year of high school going to the Warped Tour. You guys remember that? It was like a punk
Oh,
tour.
yeah, hell yeah.
And I remember seeing Blink 182 there, and I didn't even like them, but I remember being like, oh, they're in this scene that feels slightly underground, even though it was at this huge fucking amphitheater, so it couldn't have been too underground. But nobody really knew who they were. And then I remember a couple years later seeing them on MTV with the more like emo stuff. And I felt like personally affronted, as if like, oh no, everyone knows about this now, but I didn't even like them to begin with, but I was still like, fuck these guys.
I had a very similar story with that band Local H. We saw them open up for Stone Temple Pilots, and it was like, oh yeah, these guys are fucking great. And then they had that song Bound for the Floor that just don't get it and keep it copacetic. Became a huge hit, and I was like, oh, this underground band that I like is no longer underground. Fuck all you guys. I liked it before you liked them.
Another song built around a vocab word that young Rob took note of in his early years.
Let me put that on my list.
So I want to pull the conversation back to the song that we were just talking about for a second, because I have taken the opportunity to take a couple of cheap pot shots at Lars, and I will fully admit that I've taken some cheap pot shots at Lars. And I want to say that this song is defined by that snare drum fill, that is the thing that defines this song. It's not complex. It is not hard to do. It is tasteful as fuck. And it's really hard to have something that is not crazy complex and catches you off guard be the definition of a song on an instrument like the drums. And props to him. It really does tie the song together.
Now he's not going to sue us for this episode.
Right. Especially when you're not Neil Peart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on that as well, it takes a little bit more listening. You have to kind of pointedly listen for it. But Jason Newsted's bass playing on that song is also extremely, extremely perfect. because, again, to what we were talking about earlier, he doesn't follow the guitar riffs. He lays underneath them, and he actually plays just behind the beat a little bit, and it adds to that sludgy, heavy feel. And if you listen to it, you hear this thick, chunky, grooving bass line that's going on behind these really heavy wall of sound kind of guitars. And it's phenomenal. It's probably my favorite. Aside, it's interesting because my friend of Misery, of course, Jason quote unquote wrote, but this to me is, I think, Jason's like shining moment on the album for sure.
Can we just talk for a second about the best bass gig of all time to sort of just pop into this situation and then be a part of what, like top 15 best-selling albums of all time? You're just like, well, now I can just do whatever the fuck I want to for the rest of my life because I got that Black Album.
Probably
money,
also pretty intimidating.
Pretty intimidating. He took a lot of shit for a lot of years, right up until he left the band.
No pain, no gain.
They
man.
auditioned Les Claypool as well
Yeah.
because Kirk Hammett went to high school with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been wild.
Would have been.
That would have been a bad fit.
Can you imagine a fan reaction to that album?
Like, you're not allowed to play above the 5th fret, motherfucker. Get back.
I want to write a song about ducks that drive go-karts. All right, yay! There we go.
All right. Let's move it along. We got a few more songs to get through here.
Before we move on to the next song, the fact that the drum break is 6 beats long, like the silence break is 6 beats long, that catches me off guard every goddamn time. And it's not like it's 13 beats long or something like that, but like I'd sit there and count it up. Like, that's a 6 beat long break. Good on them. I'm sure that it was originally 4, and they're like, yeah, let's just make it 6. It sounds cooler. Good call.
You're referring to the silence,
I'm referring
right?
to the silence.
The actual silence. Yeah. Well, let's drop that in here.
But it's that little bit of extra hesitation that makes you go, oh, my brain feels like it should be 4.
Yep.
But then I got 2 more beats, and then it hits, and you're like, whoa.
Well, and it gets you because your head is nodding on the wrong beat then. You're like,
yeah.
Oh, no, it's not there. Okay, yeah, there we go, yeah.
But it keeps you awake and engaged and listening.
I agree. Great tune.
Yeah.
All right, let's roll on to the next tune on the record, the third tune on the record, Holier Than Thou.
Interesting track.
Well, I put this one on there originally because I was thinking that this really sounded like older Metallica to me. And for another reason, which is it does crack me up. I do like the song. It sounds like the older version of Metallica, the less poppy, the more thrashy, fast version. Yep. But also something that really cracks me up. I'm not the biggest metalhead in the world, I'll admit it. But what I like about heavy metal sometimes is the pomposity of it, where they could be so hard and rock so fast, and then they just toss in like biblical language, like judge not lest ye be judged yourself. That always makes me
isn't there also a lyric in this song that says your brain is still gelatin or something to that effect?
So it's one of the opening lines. Yeah.
It's like mixing in the grandiose, religious themes and whatever that is.
It also stood out to me, speaking of Lars, is there's a spot where Lars just plays a measure of snare hits on the ands, and it's like a little cool feel change to transition between 2 parts. So to me, that felt like a good little addition by Lars that was a little unexpected, got you a little off your head rocking beat.
Yep.
And correctly broke up the monotony of some of these tunes.
Yeah. And it's just a great riff. You know, it's interesting, that whole, it's kind of a very similar, it's almost the tail to the head of Enter Sandman, because the song doesn't really hit until almost a minute in, right? It's that and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then finally it hits with that kind of real thrashy, even though it's slowed down, that thrashy. Interestingly enough, this track was the one that Bob Rock thought was going to be the biggest hit on the album.
I read that too, and they still kind of give him shit about it, or at least later on they were like, "You thought this was going to be the single," but it may have been before it had words, possibly. But
Maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely their. It felt like the biggest like bridge from their past to what they were trying to do. But yeah, I found that pretty wild too.
My my note on this song is Taylor Swift does metal. Felt like that Taylor Swift song "Shake It Off," where it's just like haters gonna hate, but you're just gonna move on past it. You holier than thou. But no, it's like. I have a question, and it's in my notes for this particular song. Is the Black Album the birth of what I, in my head, think of as the Hetfield harmony? That, the harmony that I'm talking about, like the one Hetfield on Hetfield harmony that he does. It might be like a fifth above or something like that. That I don't think it appears on any of the other albums, but it just seems to scream Metallica.
Is there a specific...
Like a moment?
The Enter Sandman harmony you're talking about?
No, it's not the Enter Sandman harmony. I will...
He harmonizes himself on one, doesn't he?
He harmonizes himself on one, but it's not the same harmony. There's like this one harmony that I feel like defines this album, which it's... Yeah, you're right. It's like a bunch of different Hetfields all kind of stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, this was the birth of that.
Scream Hetfield harmony.
Yeah, there's a stack at the end of Sad But True that I feel is
I read that he used to double... They used to double his vocal a lot, but then they found that just wasn't... It was sounding too muddy, and that this was the first album that they wanted him to harmony himself, if that's even a word.
Yeah, harmonize with yourself.
Harmonize, you mean? You majored in English, Alan. Come on.
Harmony himself. It is so difficult to like get an exact match on a vocal take. I can tell you from experience, it's hard enough doing it on guitar, but to do it vocally, like, good luck. Right?
I don't think it's that hard.
Well,
actually,
yeah.
I gotta go against
Rob's
you there.
gonna say that because Rob's a goddamn machine when it comes to doing vocal takes. You look at the fucking wave files of Rob's vocal takes.
Machine.
Okay.
It's called practice. Guys.
Whereas I was just dealing with a similar issue where we're like mixing actually a metal album that Rob and I were doing, and I'm like, it sounds like I'm doing a group vocal because I have two of myself, and then we did the low fourth harmony, and there's two of that. And like, it sounds like a group vocal because it's not lockstep. Rob's like, I don't have that problem. Like, fuck you.
So Holier Than Thou brings up a question, right? About records you must listen to before you die, right? So a lot of these songs rock. All these songs rock, right? I mean, I guess we're we could identify one that we all say sucks, right? But like, when am I gonna listen to 64 minutes, 62? Like, when am I gonna do that? What's the right setting for me
to sit down and listen to the album front to back? You mean
in general? Yeah, like, what's the right venue? What's the right
driving back?
Like, I'm
from
not
the
gonna
hockey
sit
game,
down
Phil.
for dinner and eat, but the hockey game, like, the game begins.
No,
right? Like, they turn the
You're
music
driving
off.
home from a hockey game, and you're like a little bit drunk, and you're a little bit tired. You don't want to fall asleep at
After
this
they
night.
won.
Okay, keep going,
and you're like,
keep going.
Yeah,
Flyers won.
yeah,
Phil.
Flyers won, and you're trying to get home, but you're like, I got about an hour drive and be stuck
this
in
is not a
traffic for a
realistic
little bit, but
scenario.
I got to stay on my toes here. That's the one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The Flyers lost the squeaker. How about that?
That would
I don't know.
never
I've got, so
Never be close.
I drive a 12, geez, I don't even know. I guess it's a 14-year-old vehicle at this point. I still have a CD changer in my truck. I have the Black Album on, like, it has never left my changer since I put it in 7-8 years ago, like, whatever. It's always in my truck. It's always on.
So it's highway driving.
It's highway
music?
driving music, city driving music, whatever. It's all good. Yeah.
It's what I put it on walking around Bangkok yesterday or a couple days ago, and it's great headbanging, just walking around music.
I use it at the
but
gym.
You are hinting at one of the key complaints I have with the record, which is it's too damn long.
Wow, interesting.
Metallica, what were you thinking? You should have cut like 3 songs from this thing. But we're gonna get to that because, in my opinion, the front half of the record is extremely strong. And things are going to go downhill from here, guys. So let's move it right along to Nothing Else Matters. Perhaps the biggest departure for Metallica and the most controversial song in the metalhead area. Let's play a little snippet of that.
So close, no matter how far. Couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trusting who we are, and nothing else matters. Never opened myself this way. Life is ours, we live it our way. Hold these words I don't just say, and nothing else matters. Trust I seek and I find in you. Every day for us something new. Open mind for a different view, and nothing else matters.
So the anecdote I heard about this one is that they did this cool thing. And Metallica's known, I think, for doing really cool things by the fans, by their hardcore fans. They gave away 10,000 plus tickets to a listening party at Madison Square Garden before this record came out. All these people came to be in Madison Square Garden, just listen to the record. They didn't play or anything. And Hetfield just talks about being backstage and being worried for when Nothing Else Matters is going to come on, thinking people are just going to start throwing up and like lard ass and Stand By Me or something. But no, it went over okay.
Yeah. There's a great quote by Bob Rock from the Year and a Half in Life of Metallica, and Bob Rock says something to the effect of, because the guys in Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth would be like so upset if you actually made something like melodic and nice, right?
This song has feelings. Fuck that.
Yeah.
Honestly, you
always
take
told
the
this song-
distortion off these guitars, and it's not a heavy song at all. Like you could undistort those guitars and have them be all acoustic, and it would still sound really good. It sound like just a melodious, nice song.
Well, they have. I mean, look at S&M that they did in 2001, right?
Yeah, they pushed that, or they got an orchestra, but then they pushed it way down in the mix, right?
I like this song. I think it's a cool song. I think I always had a soft spot for this song because when I first started playing guitar, I realized that you could play that opening part just on the open strings.
Yep.
And actually felt like I knew shit. And
yeah,
it was cool.
Going back to a song that births guitar players.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a classic.
That's a great point, yeah.
And I've even on this podcast often used it as a reference for, hey, my brain kind of needs a break from the rock to make me be able to feel rock again.
Sure.
So this is kind of helpful for that.
It's a palate cleanser kind of thing.
It's
almost.
a palate cleanser.
But it was,
exactly.
I think this was actually the biggest hit on the album. And this is, to somebody's point, they said this is like, the metal record you could listen to with your mom. Right. And I remember introducing my mom to Metallica by playing her Nothing Else Matters. It's like, oh, you got to listen to this. You're going to love this. And she's like, oh, that's a really beautiful song. And Elton John has actually called this one of the most beautiful ballads of all time, which, I mean, Elton John, come on, right? Take him or leave it. Like, he's written some good stuff.
Oh, I like
Indeed.
Elton John.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one thing I wanted to... I watched the Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica documentary that's about the making of this.
Yeah.
And there's this one scene where the band's just going through a take, and Hetfield's got his music stand in front of him. They're all like sitting down, being all serious in the band room. He's got his music stand in front of him in the room, and on one side he's got like lyrics or chords or whatever. They're playing this song. And on the other side he's just got a page from Penthouse.
Yep.
Just staring at pornography.
They're 27, man.
He was the only one not going through a
Gotta
divorce
keep
at
his
that time.
energy up,
I just thought that, like, oh, I need this as inspiration. Because we've all seen the Nothing Else Matters video. There's a bunch of blurred out pornography on the walls of the studio. I get that part of it, but what was surprising to me was like, no, I need to be staring at this 100% of the time while I'm doing the take.
like peripheral vision.
Yeah. Well, again, you got a bunch of 25 to 30-year-old guys, right? One up in each other. They're not like gym rats, so they're not like bros pounding their chests. But like musically speaking, metal is a very similar culture. Right? I can play faster than you. I can play more technical than you. I can play heavier than you. I can growl louder than you. And so, yeah, to have this song appear on the album, you'd have to maybe have some cognitive dissonance going. I know this is a good business decision, but I don't know if I can really do it. But I mean, he pulls it off, and it really birthed that golden voice Hetfield sound that we've all kind of come to know and love over the following 30 years.
Well, I feel like they could have gone at that period of time too. In '91, they could have still done 80s power ballad. Like, I think that option was still there to do something
so
like
glad they
super
didn't.
cheesy. And yeah, totally, they didn't. And I'm sure it was jarring for the longtime fans, but it works really well. It's a fucking great song.
Yeah. And I mean, again, we're getting back to the commerciality of it, but if that's even a word, the success of Nothing Else Matter broke them in markets that would never have played them on the radio before. It allowed them to play in every single continent on Earth, in every weird little corner and every little backwater. If they had a football stadium, if they had a soccer pitch, if they had an airplane hangar where they could get power and put in 1,000, 1,500 or 10,000 people, they went and played there. And that's thanks to Nothing Else Matters, in no small part.
Was Nothing Else Matters the first song on side 2 of the tape or the second song on side 2?
That is a great question.
I feel like it's got to be I'm gonna look that one up.
Sorry, I was just I just ran out for a second, but did we talk about that show that they played in Russia for like 500,000 people?
No, we didn't talk about it yet.
Oh my
We didn't
good
talk about that
God.
yet.
The footage of that is utter insanity. There's like multiple stations of speakers like going off into the distance and you can see like the sound delay of the notes that they're hitting as the crowd reacts to them. I could not imagine playing for 500,000 people.
That feels like it'd be a pretty life-changing performance to deliver.
Yeah, it's almost like scary to look at. It's like, holy shit.
How many people died in the crowd just through sheer...
Yeah.
I think
so what are the numbers on
two
that?
people died in the crowd.
I've seen ranges from like 500,000 to like 1.5 million.
Sorry, just to go back real quick. So it's actually the second track of side 2 of the tape.
Second track of side 2.
Google image search.
I was just
sorry, Nick. I thought you said 2
yeah.
people died during that show. I was like, this seems low.
Oh, I'm sure more people
too.
died than that because the Russian military was there as security, and they had never seen anything like this before, and they were still they're still at that point under like communist rule. Like the wall in Germany had fallen like maybe 3 or 4 months prior. The military was like, we have to keep our people in line. And of course, people are letting loose. Like it'd been 15 years of, copy of a copy of a copy of a Metallica tape and a fake of a fake of a fake of a shirt. And, you've got 500,000 people showing up and going crazy and jumping up and down and being excited in very communist controlled Russia. Yeah. The military, terrifying. I'm sure, beat dozens of people to death.
Based on my detailed study of YouTube, Russians just seem very sane and chill.
And quiet and relaxed, right?
Not a lot of drinking going on there either. I'm sure it's a very sober affair. My question is, of those 500,000 people, how many were women? Like 400, 500 maybe?
I mean, based on just looking at some images on YouTube, I'm pretty sure all of them are wearing black t-shirts. Pretty sure that's approaching 100%.
I remember
saturation.
So gender becomes tough to identify.
Clearly they were a huge band. I agree the song's good, but I do have a complaint, which is it goes on too long. I think if this had been the last song on a record, I could have stomached a 6.5 minute song, but it really should probably end around 4 minutes. So that's my main concern with it. But I wanted to also express, since I think we all watched the videos again this week, and they were a big part of at least my listening to this record, the MTV music videos, I just want to express support for the behind the scenes music video. That was like, that actually did mean a lot to me when I was a kid. I loved seeing how the sausage was made, so to speak, via those videos.
It almost reminded me of that Aerosmith song, What It Takes. They had different versions where one was like a produced, they're playing behind chicken wire in a bar or some shit, and then the other one is just them in the studio. And I always thought those were cool to just see. You're not really seeing that much of the behind the scenes, but sort of no pretense.
But you're trying to pick up hints. I'm just saying, as a kid, 100%. That was really interesting to me. That I was always curious about the process behind making music, and this is the kind of thing that helped with that.
Year and a half in the life of Metallica was my education of how to make a record. of how to be a studio musician, of how to play a Metallica song. Frankly, I would watch it and rewind it and like look at their hands and try to figure out what they were doing. And this is back in the days where like I had a buddy that would showed me like how to slow down a turntable. So you'd put it down to like, if you had a 78, you turned it down to like 33, or if you had a 30, whichever way, or you'd like load a bunch of quarters on top of the needle so it would like slow down, and you could weight the thing so you could actually like learn the tunes as you were going. Of course, you'd have to rewind the or detune your guitar, but like I used that same technology, and I'd like actually stretch my tapes out to slow them down, and I'd put them back. I'd have to respool them, of course, and it would be all warbly and gross, and I'd have to like detune my guitar to like weird like 3 1/8 tunings, like, but having access to something like that to actually
this is what it's going to take.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'm in. This is me. This is going to be my life. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to study it. So yes, Rob,
it took all that
agree.
to figure out an E minor chord?
Yeah. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Northern Ontario, man. My town had 350 people. I was one of 2 guitar players.
No shit. I'm just giving shit.
So you're like the second best guitar player in your town, right? That's pretty good.
For about 6 months, yeah. And then the 3rd.
Awesome. Okay, let's roll it right along here. We're running long, so let's keep it going. Next song on our list is "The God That Failed." Let's play a snippet of that.
Pride you took, pride you feel, pride that you feel when you kneel. Not the word, not the love, not what you thought from above. It feeds, it grows, it clouds all that you will know. These things, decide just what you believe. I see faith in your eyes. Never you hear the discouraging lies. I hear faith in your cries. Broken is the promise, betrayal. The healing hand held back by the deep nail. Follow the God that failed.
Okay, to my mind, I put this on as the low point. I'm bored, and this riff isn't really speaking to me. Is it supposed to be edgy? Aren't all metal bands kind of anti-religion already? Isn't that like a baseline of what they do? That's my take.
I have 4 notes, or 4 words as my only notes for this, and those notes were weak, boring, aimless, forgettable. And that's my entire synthesis of the song. I'm probably
Shall we
giving
hear Nick defend this one, maybe?
Okay, so I don't. It's hard. I don't disagree. I get where you're coming from. I hear it. Personally, I hear production stuff going on in this. I hear, Jason with his 12-string bass that's been layered. I think, and again, I was reading through notes and things, production notes.
Can you just pause on that for a second?
Yes.
12-string bass.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about rock and roll excess.
Right?
8 too many strings, at least.
But they didn't use it as like a bass on the album. They used it as a sound effect. So they layered it up and recorded it and recorded it and recorded it. The beginning of Unforgiven, there's like that weird chimey gong sound. That's also.
I think
his
you're talking. Are you
bass.
talking about Wherever I May Roam? I think
Wherever I May Roam. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I think Unforgiven has like a French horn at the beginning.
Yeah, they sort of tried to emulate like Enrico Morricone, but there's a lot of really cool stuff that goes on in The God That Failed, and if you listen to it from like a musician's / maybe not even musicians, but like a producer's ear, there's a lot of really cool shit that's happening in that. Just from the mix and the spread on it, I find the spread on this particular song a lot wider and more theatrical, if I can say that word, than a lot of the other tunes. A lot of the other tunes are really pointed and really, really, really focused, and this one has a very airy feel to it is in comparison to something like Sad But True, for example. So, like I said, I get where you're coming from. I don't agree. For me, the weak point on the album is actually Of Wolf and Man. I think that's like the cheesiest song of all of them. And, Hetfield howling like a wolf. I'm just like, oh, come on, really? But anyway, that's...
Do we got a timestamp on that?
Well, this one...
On the wolf howl?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find. He does it a couple times.
You definitely don't want to listen to the whole song just to find that wolf out, by the way. So get a timestamp.
I'll back you up just a little bit by saying that you're right. The God That Failed, one of the things I got from the documentary is there's a track of Hetfield cocking a rifle.
Yeah.
As a sound effect on there. I couldn't quite find it in the mix, to be honest with you, but I thought that seemed like a fun bit of studio experimentation.
Yeah.
I will say this song to me seemed the most like the dumbing down of their previous sound to try to be accessible in a bad way. I think that the rest of the songs are accessible, but they don't seem dumbed down. For some reason, this one just came off as dumbed down for the sake of accessibility in a way that made it less than it should have been. Whereas the other songs are more accessible, but I don't feel a lessening of them. They still have the Metallica sound, but they haven't been lessened by the attempt to make them a little bit more accessible. And so, like the first 30 seconds of the song, I thought it was like an Alice in Chains song. I was just like, I hadn't listened to this album in a long time, and so I had the playlist on. And I was like, oh, did we get to the end of the playlist and they're just playing me an Alice in Chains song? And then I was like, oh no, this is definitely a Metallica song. But then like nothing really interesting happened all that much. Like there's a good guitar solo, didn't really save the song for me. My question is right at the exact 4-minute mark. There's like a that sounds like tape bleed almost, and I'm wondering if it's one of those it's the tape bleeds there we just have to lean into it so we pumped it type of things going on. It works actually really well, but I'm just wondering if that was like one of those we have to deal with the limitations of what's on the tape type of situations.
Hetfield's just walking around the studio, just going, yeah. It's just the bleeds.
Oh yeah, maybe from one of the drum mics.
Yeah, from a drum.
Yeah,
mic.
instead of it hits actually where you would have the backbeat cymbal.
It does.
And I don't know if they
Yeah.
I don't know if they did it purposely to replace a cymbal, but that's I feel like how they used it. And it's got that but it's a way back microphone thing.
Yeah, it's used to well. It's used to good effect.
Yeah, it's
They use
cool.
it well, but I'm wondering
Yeah.
if they were like, oh shit, this is on there. We can't get rid of it. So I guess we just gotta use it.
And the shotguns are cool. They actually pan left to right, and they do it in the intro, and then they also do it 3/4 of the way through the song as they sort of revamp that intro to build back out to the out of the song.
I didn't pick up on the shotguns cocking, and that's strange for me.
Yeah, that's
If
off
you're on
brand.
top of that. Yeah, seriously, it's really off brand for me. But all right,
Yeah.
fair enough.
They're very subtle. You wouldn't notice it unless somebody has pointed it out. But once somebody points it out and you hear it, you'll never unhear it.
I don't know if that statement is ever made. It's a subtle shotgun cock. It's a really subtle shotgun cocking.
So it comes in at like 11 seconds. So there's
Okay.
the drums and the bass, and then as soon as the guitars come in with the chugga-ja, and you can hear him. It's like a Red Ryder, not a BB gun, but like what do you call that? Like a cock action
lever action.
shotgun, the lever action. Yeah,
Lever action.
Sorry, I'm
rifle.
Canadian.
Yeah.
We don't really have guns up here.
It's okay. It's not a pump action
I'm
shotgun.
kidding.
It's a lever
We have
action.
lots of hunting
We
rifles.
have enough for the both of us.
Yeah, right.
I could supply everybody on this call a few times over.
There we go.
ATF's listening. Okay, let's move right along to the last song on our focus list. Round this thing out, The Struggle Within.
Yeah.
Play that one.
Reaching out for something you got to feel, while clutching to what you thought was real. Kicking at a dead horse pleases you, no way of showing your gratitude. So many things you don't want to do. What is and what have you got to lose? What the hell? What the hell? What is it you think you're gonna find? Hypocrite, hypocrite. Boredom's a tip to the boring mind. Struggle with it. It's what you find. Struggle with it. Your ruin. Struggle with it. You seal your own coffin. The struggling within. Holding out a home, it becomes a hell. Turning it into your prison cell.
Nick, you want to take it?
Yeah, and I'm glad we got to incorporate this with our sort of analysis of the record, because I feel like this is really, it's one of those deep cut tracks that I think a lot of people just forget about and a lot of reviewers don't ever talk about. I feel like it's the unsung hero of the album. It's actually my favorite track on the album. Similar, I think it was Tom talking about one of the tracks kind of being like the closest to like kind of the original Metallica songs. I feel like this one is the most old Metallica on the record. It's fast, it's furious, it's short, which is again not really in line with what they used to do, but like keeping with the Black Album vibe, it's very short. And it's just really cool. It's got like this really militaristic start to it, which is perfect for the time. Again, you got 91, you got the Persian Gulf War, all sorts of stuff going on. And the solo, I think in non-typical Hammett fashion, doesn't just focus on the minor pentatonic. He actually has a run, which still fits within the minor pentatonic, but he uses this minor run, and he kind of uses a pedal tone, very similar to what Bach would use in like a fugue. And it's during the solo, it's kind of the halfway 3/4 mark where he has the pedal tone on the top and he runs down the scale and comes back up the scale, pedaling with that high note. And it's just it's such a tasty solo that it just, for me, is Hammett's shining moment on the album. And again, I love the track.
Yeah, Nick, I'm glad that you pointed this one out as one to dive into deeper, because I did come to appreciate this a lot, actually, and I do think that the feel change from that sort of march beat at the beginning to the kind of kick into the sort of heavier, like, speeding up riff, like, it was really good. It felt epic. It's got a great guitar stack. And I feel like they didn't use that as much on this album as one would expect in a metal album, where they sort of start stacking those harmonies over a riff, but they really nailed it.
It does have the really cool, like, Thin Lizzy, hardcore Thin Lizzy metal vibe.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure. Which you definitely hear more on earlier Metallica records, right? Like, it's a little more, like, it's a little more obvious. It's been done, right? But it doesn't mean it's not badass, right?
Yeah.
And the people that, like, that's the thing that people want to hear. They're like, "Where's my Thin Lizzy?"
Yeah. Like, I want to be able to close my eyes and feel like I'm fighting a fucking dragon. Give me that vibe when your guitar.
I agree. I'm glad we focused on it. It made me give the song a second look, because part of what I was feeling with this record, though, was that by the time I got to the back half of this record, especially the last track, I was just tired of listening to this type of music. I guess it's because I'm not a metalhead. It's a lot. It's an hour long. And as we've previously discussed, I think 40 minutes is about the right amount of time for a record. Let's assume that came about only because of the physical medium of vinyl. But feels about right, even for bands I do really, really like. An hour feels a little long. I will say that one thing that kept bumping me about this song, I agree with the musical comments, the lyrics felt the most shoehorned in rhythmically. And I don't think we mentioned this, but Hetfield's pointed out that the way they always write lyrics is last. They always write melodies first, and then he writes lyrics to fit inside those melodies. And I think normally it's worked pretty well for him, even with this kind of title-first songwriting approach that they often have. I'm good with most of that. But in this case, the lyrics in the chorus and the rhythms across those lyrics felt really strange and shoehorned in. They change the number of syllables quite drastically, and it just feels, I don't know why, I couldn't tune that part of it out.
Well, I will say this, my note on this is that Hetfield is not a very good singer on this track. And a lot of the time, I feel like they do a lot to make him sound good, and he's not, I'm not saying he's a terrible singer or anything like that, but he's got a voice that needs some massaging, and maybe it needed a little bit more work on this one for it to come across. And part of it, I think, is the sort of clunky rhythm that it gets into, vocally. I still like the song, though. I still do think it's actually a pretty rocking song.
Yeah.
Listen to in the context of a 6-song focus list, it's like, yeah, it's great. Rob, I would agree with you. By the time I get to the end of this album, it's a long album, and I'm definitely like, I just want to listen to some like fucking Gilbert or Sullivan or something.
Well, like there are certain hip hop records where it's the same thing. I'm just fatigued by the end of it, sure. Right? And maybe it has something to do with the low end, right? Maybe it has to do with like I'm just not as familiar with the material, so it's like like that style of material. So like I actually have to work to listen to it. Like, sort of, in a different way?
Or maybe it's our shifting attention spans. These could
Yeah,
all be
2022,
factors,
right?
Yeah.
Shifting.
But that's definitely how I was feeling overall in the back half. So I thought the front half was extremely strong, and I think it kind of trailed off a little bit. Part of that was my own ear fatigue. Okay, I say we've been waxing poetic about this for quite a while now. Let's round it out. And what we're going to do, as we always do, is we're going to go around the horn here, and we're going to vote. Is Metallica's eponymous so-called Black Album a must-listen before you die? Tom, I'm going to throw it to you first.
Yeah, I'm going to give an unqualified fuck yeah to this. One of the songs that we didn't even really talk about, Wherever I May Roam, is the best song on the fucking album. That song rocks so goddamn hard. I liked this album. It's a little long, certainly. Again, it's not the snifter of brandy in the library in the evening as I'm in a contemplative mood type of album, but it has its time and place, and when you listen to it in that time and that place, it hits pretty goddamn hard. So 2 thumbs up for me. Yeah, this is a must listen.
Excellent. Let's kick it over to Phil.
So guys, I'm still torn. Like I'm still really struggling, because what I struggle with is the record and the must, right? Like, I mean, no doubt there's at least 6, probably 7 just absolute crushers on here. Probably more than that, honestly. You've got 5 or 6 classics. But it does as a record, it's like, and then I'm gonna go yes. I'm just gonna go yes. I'm not gonna overthink it too much. This record rips. It's a yes from me.
Nick.
Yeah, I mean, as I said from the beginning, I think it's definitely a yes. It's consistently for the past 32 years been on that list. If there's that game you play in high school where it's like, if you're stuck on a desert island, what 10 albums would you take with you if those were the only albums you could ever listen to again? It's consistently been on that list for me, from the production to the writing, from the story to the influence to the wall of guitars, the tight miking, even the cheesy wolf screams and the ballad of Nothing Else Matters. Like, it is, yeah, two thumbs way up.
Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's an easy yes. This is one of the easier yeses I think I've dished out on this show. I also think that, now that we're 50 plus episodes in, I do think I don't want to say the bar is shifting a little bit, but I can feel my sensibilities, at least for this stuff, moving from like, what's novel or interesting, or what's something I heard that I think is kind of cool that I didn't know about before, to really codifying like, must you listen to this before you die? And I think this easily fits into that bill. I think it's some of the things I look for are, is it iconic? Does it capture, a moment in time? Does it break ground in some way, whether you call them sellouts or not? This 100% was a groundbreaking metal album in many senses. So yeah, pretty easy yes there. Even though I will say, to Phil's point, it's a little bit of an uneven album. It's not the most, probably well balanced, but yeah, it's on there.
Yeah, despite my complaint of having, it would have been better if they just trimmed a couple tunes, and I'm a little surprised they didn't do that, but if you look back at all their records, they're all about an hour long for whatever reason.
Well, this is also sort of a problem of the era, right? Like, all of a sudden an album could be longer and people just made it longer, even though they didn't always have more material, right?
Yeah, but it's to me, it's funny that Metallica went into the studio thinking we got to be more concise, and then they still made an hour-long album. They definitely could have trimmed, just by law of mathematics, if you trim the worst 3 songs, then the album would have gotten better, right? But in any case, I agree with everything everyone said. It's a hell yes for me. Absolutely listen to this. This, to a young Rob, this taught me what rock and roll was. And I think it's still true that these are some of the most successful, effective, hard rock, metal, whatever you want to call it, songs ever, right? What I was thinking about when you look back on Metallica's career, the Black Album did 2 things for them. It rocketed them to stardom, but it also like validated their entire previous career. It made them a stadium act based on these hits, but then they've continued to be a stadium act ever since then for the last 30 years without really having any other significant hits. So that's pretty damn impressive.
That's a really interesting point, because there hasn't been a hiccup or a question in that either.
Right.
It's been like Metallica plus the backlog before that record. That's enough.
Yeah.
That's 40,000 seats plus in every city in the world. No
I also
questions
think
asked.
Exactly.
Right?
I think it can't not be said, and this is like one of my favorite San Francisco stories, which is something I would totally do if I was famous and cool like that. But they played Chemos, which is a room that Phil, you and Rob and I played together. It seats about 150 to 200 people, and they booked them as a fucking what do they call themselves? They called themselves Spun. Because apparently Bob Rock, who played bass with them, this is after Jason Newsted left in 2002, just called up Chemos and was like, hey, you have a $75 pay to play feature here, where if I just give you $75, you let me book the room for the night. And so they did that, and they played for about 150 people, and they just played a bunch of fucking songs of Metallica. And as the lore goes, apparently the bartenders did not even realize it was Metallica who played the entire time. And at the end of the night, we're like, these guys had a lot of equipment. I don't know what the fucking deal was. And they're like, yeah, that was fucking Metallica, by the way.
As we sadly know, the sound in that room is complete bullshit, so they probably couldn't hear a thing.
Dude, that's the best drummer I've ever heard walk through the door of this place.
All right. Well, there it is, Metallica. Your career has been further validated by the likes of us. Congratulations. You're on the list, baby. Now, all that remains to round out this week is to pass it over to Tom, who's going to tell us what record we're going to be listening to next week.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. And I just want to throw a thank you to Nick one more time. Thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's been
Thanks
great
for having
to get
me. It was a blast.
Yeah, it's been great to get the perspective of somebody who I feel like I was a filthy casual for this album. I just sort of heard it on MTV and was like, oh, these songs are pretty cool, but I never did the deep dive. So it's nice to hear that. But I got the Albinator 5000 here. We are going to bust it out, give it a whirl, see what we're going to listen to next week. So, drum roll, please. Next week we will be listening to... Oh, this is another really hard-rocking album that is going to blow your fucking tits off. It is Belle and Sebastian's If You're Feeling Sinister.
Could not get more of a departure.
That record is very different.
Lots of
It's gonna be
crunchy,
strong.
close mic stuff on that one.
Seriously, it's like the guitar stacks are
they
out
definitely
of
have
control.
the tent of doom
Out
for
of
that.
control guitar stack.
A lot of yes.
I think you pronounce this, yeah.
A lot of ballads.
So, yeah, get ready for that one. If you guys are ready for a head-spinning change of pace, listen to that album.
Excelente. Excited for that week. Before we sign off officially, again, yeah, I agree. Thanks, Nick. It was great going through this with you. Anything you want to plug here on the show, Nick? Where should people go to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at my website. It's guitardojo.ca. And there you will find links to my Facebook group and my YouTube, all of my socials, all that kind of good stuff. I sell my my books and my courses there. If you are an intermediate guitar player and you're looking to get better faster without the jargon, hassle, and stress of music theory, I have a course for you. It is called the Guitar Fretboard Infinity Loop System. And exclusively for 1001 Album Complaint podcast listeners, I have, for the first 10 people that go and buy that, I have a 40% off coupon code. It is 1001 complaints 40. So there you go.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And we'll put all those links. Those links will be in the notes of the episode as well. Really appreciate it. We didn't even mention modes once, man. What do you know? What do you know?
Modes are scales and scales are modes.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that.
Kept it real simple up in here. Okay. Well, that team, listeners, if you like what we're doing, feel free to give us a holler, give Nick a holler, get better at your instrument, better yourself, or shoot us over how wrong we really are or how right we are over at 1001 Album Complaints at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, I've been Rob.
I've been Tom.
I've been Phil.
And I'm Alan.
Boosh!
Yeah!